Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Shanti Shanti Shanti. Namaste. It is my great honor and privilege to welcome you all to another edition of the Surendra Paul lecture. It is an annual event that celebrates the pursuit of knowledge, the exchange of ideas, and the power of learning to inspire change. And to do the honor, we have on the stage Swami Supernanandji Maharaj, the revered secretary to the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture, Mr. Anirban Dotto, DGM Corporate Communication, APJ Surrendra Group, and well, of course, Professor Radharaman Chakrabarti, who is the keynote speaker to this evening. He would be speaking on the subject, the social content of nationalism. To speak a few words about Professor Chakrabarti, he is an internationally recognized speaker and orator in the international studies. Also, he has got pretty big wings to hover along other subjects like history, art, literature, and even philosophy. He is presently the project director of the UNESCO-approved project International Understanding for the Human Unities that is going on in the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture, and is also the founding Vice Chancellor of the Netaji Subhash Open University. Without further ado, may I request Mr. Anirban Dotto to please come and deliver the welcome address and also make a formal introduction to today's lecture, Surendra Paul Lecture 2024.
Good evening, Swami Sampunanandaji Maharaj, Secretary of the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture. Shupananandaji Maharaj. Sorry. Eminent educationist Dr. Radharaman Chakrabarti. Respected guest, everyone from APJ Surrendra Group, Anchor, Mr. Shayok Chakrabarti, and all those who are present today. It's both an honor and privilege to welcome you to the APJ Surrendra Paul Memorial Lecture. On behalf of the APJ Surrendra Group, I would like to extend my warmest regards to each of you being here this evening. Unfortunately, Mr. Karan Paul, the Group Chairman, APJ Surrendra Group, is unable to attend this famed event today. However, he has sent his best compliments to everyone here and his deep gratitude for your continued support for this lecture series. Since its inception in 1991, the Surendra Paul Memorial Lecture has grown to become a cornerstone event, not only for our group, but for the broader intellectual and corporate community in Calcutta. We are proud that year after year, the lecture provides a platform for distinguished thought leaders to engage with us on important and relevant topics, sparkling meaningful dialogue and fresh perspective. The significance of this lecture is magnified by the fact it is held in the memory of our esteemed former chairman, Mr. Surendra Paul. Mr. Paul was a visionary businessman and a global thinker whose leadership and foresight continue to inspire us. He was a man of great intellect, energy, determination. His ability to anticipate global trends, coupled with his commitment to excellence, was a hallmark of his leadership. Beyond his business acumen, Mr. Paul's passion for fostering thought leadership and innovation is what truly makes his lecture a lasting tribute to his legacy. It is an honor to share with you the inspiring journey of other two remarkable individuals whose vision and leadership laid the foundation for the APJ Surrendra Group. Mr. Jeet Paul, visiting Calcutta in early 1940s with the aim of seeking orders for his steel business. His passion and determination led him to relocate to Calcutta in 1951. Driven by the growing demands of his business, APJ was built from scratch, founded on the pillars of love and trust. Mr. Jeet Paul always believed that performance builds image, not the other way around. His unwavering simplicity, infectious enthusiasm, and meticulous attention to detail left a lasting mark on everything he did, shaping the legacy of APJ. In April 1990, under a tragic circumstance, Mrs. Surendra Paul took over the chairmanship of the APJ Surrendra group. Her leadership was instrumental in steering the group through challenging times. In July 2004, she passed the baton to her son, Mr. Karan Paul, as she became the role of chairperson emeritus, marking the beginning of a new chapter in the group's history. As a part of the APJ family, we take immense pride in the fact that this lecture has become a prominent intellectual forum, attracting the finest minds from various fields. And today, we are fortunate to hear respected speaker on the subject, social content of nationalism. Before I conclude, I would like to take a moment to express our sincere gratitude to the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture, Gold Park, for their continued partnership in hosting this lecture series. Once again, I thank you for all being here, and I look forward to an interesting and enriching discussion from Professor Chakrabarti. Thank you.
Now, may I request Professor Dr. Radharaman Chakrabarti to deliver this year's Surendra Paul lecture on the subject, the social content of nationalism.
Namaskar. Our most esteemed Secretary Maharaj, Swami Suparnanandaji, and expected revered monks of this institute, to them my pronouns. And I am very glad to have already met the representative of the APJ group, Mr. Anirban Datto. I'm happy to welcome him. And I'm also really enthused that although the size of attendance is not, that, exciting, but I'm still more feeling encouraged because of the presence of quite a few very learned persons with whom I had earlier acquaintance. So, my regards to them, and let me just enter into the main purpose of this occasion. The subject of the discussion today has already been circulated, and it is my purpose to present an alternative perspective to the usual discourses we find in respect of nationalism. Nationalism itself is a very familiar subject, and it is not confined to any particular discipline. In fact, my perspective would dwell on this very significant fact that nationalism is more a matter of existence than a matter of academic study. And in taking this position, I have found myself confronted by certain types of approaches coming from mainly the Western scholars, and also strikingly shared by many Indian scholars here as well, who have expressed very deep doubts about any claim that India ever had an earlier experience, or at least an earlier sense of nationalism as they would understand. So I'm going to, examine this viewpoint and try to present an alternative perspective. Now, given the time construct, I will have to, go through these roughly prepared notes, but it is a structured presentation. So let me first of all, give you a clear picture of the structure itself. The first section, there will be 3 or 4 sections, and if time permits, I hope I will be able to finish by 5:55. The first section of this structured presentation would deal with the commonly accepted position of the established scholars with reference to the loopholes in their position that oftentimes escape our attention. Then next comes the question, which is our main concern, it's my concern also. Why should there be a divergence of opinion among scholars as to the origin of national spirit in India? I use the expression national spirit. Is it pre or post-colonial, homegrown or imported? And in dealing with these doubts, it would be both proper and fair also to take an unbiased stand and rely on hard evidence confirmed by history. And when you come to the upshot of the entire discussion of, in fact, the result of my scanning of the existing facts and evidences, the upshot will be that India should be viewed as a special case where nationalism has been developing through the ages, through material, moral, and other extra-moral, extra-material transactions. By that I mean the spiritual background in which even the mundane life is spent in this holy land of India. So that is about the curtain, and I now start with the text itself. And wherever necessary, I'll definitely cut down the content of the text so as to meet the time limit. Nationalism is largely taken as a political phenomenon, both by the elite and also by the common persons, anywhere. But essentially, it has to be seen as the product of social churning, where we find experts in several disciplines: anthropology, sociology, economics, civil and military administration, plus political and natural geography. All these things meet to survey the nature of nationalism in any civilized society. Now, of course, when I refer to civilized society, I mean to say that most of the nations or nation states that we find today in the world, well, they must have gone through several stages of the evolution of the spirit of nationalism. And finally, many of them have achieved what is called statehood. But achieving statehood does not always mean that one has actually completed the entire circuit of the development of nationalism. Nationalism is a much more deep-seated spirit, which is why if India is a nation, full-fledged nation with undisputed sovereign authority over its territory, well, we certainly cannot say this of the Jarvas of the Andamans or the Eskimos of the Arctic. But we may not say this in respect of the people who are living in Palestine. They have, very truly speaking, attained the status of a state. But they have to stop halfway because of certain international complications. I'm not going into that. The question before us is this: when can a community be said to have come to that point of unmistakable solidarity, where it can be treated as a nationality first and then it can qualify for being a nation state? Of course, this is not a question of fixing a particular date or a period, it is actually a process. And the contributory factors that enter into this process is what I would call the content of nationalism. The social content of nationalism, actually. Now, apart from factors which activate the process at the beginning, many other factors also join the process in course of time. And members of the society will absorb these new inputs as additional social content. That is why nations are seen to change their form and also character from what they were at the birth. This is an organic, naturally guided process. It's almost like the mutations that happen in the life process of any living being on earth. Now, thus far there is a general agreement among the scholars on the trajectory of nationalism as a defining social phenomenon. But the problematic arises mainly in the fields of historical studies and also the fields of social sciences. The practitioners of these two subject fields, well, they raise certain very complex issues. When the whole issue of the process of growth of nationalism is applied to the case of India. In all other cases, they have no problem, they have no disputes, but in India, they are really, I would say, at a loss, but they think that they have taken a position and it has got to be respected. I am not going to go that far. They are actually skeptics. And if we separate the position of the historians in this category, well, their problem is phenomenal. Phenomenal in the sense that they insist that, well, it will be our task to search out if at any stage before the advent of European colonialists, the Indians were ever concerned with the notion of colonialism. In fact, they find many negative indications which do not support the growth of nationalism in the ordinary sense of the term. We take it as a legitimate query, and I'll try to meet that query. Now, on that point, I feel indebted to a very incisive comment coming from a highly respected historian, though on the left side, a Marxist. He is pretty well known and widely respected all over the world. I am talking about the historian Eric Hobsbawm. And he was a historian, and he wanted historians to accept the responsibility of not distorting the facts and not allowing history to be used for ideological or political purposes. It's a very sacred position for any scholar in the field of history. And we know what kind of trouble may arise when we deviate from this position. India not accepted, today at least. Now, what happens to the social scientists? They, on the other hand, find that the issue was largely ideological, and their position rests on the premise that ideologies like nationalism or communism are specific to certain space and time. Communism can develop only in a particular context. It cannot be universalized, although the communists would like to have that. So also is nationalism. I would say that this is taking matters too far. ideologies, to my mind, wherever they may originate, cannot strike roots overnight when they are transported to some other social situation. They must grow out of mature consciousness on the part of the inhabitants of that particular society, and whether that would at all happen depends on how, if it is imported, how receptive the members of the society would be to the imported idea, if it is nationalism. The preparatory process, in my view, cannot simply be ruled out. It has got to be accepted. In the West, nationalism itself being an ideology, presents a very curious picture. For instance, there are other ideologies which originated in the West, like, say, liberalism, socialism, even communism. So what happens? What did we see? We saw that, they use nationalism in different ways. So far as liberalism or socialism is concerned, they don't need nationalism as a prop-up, as a support of the system. But they, keep nationalism as a kind of goal to be achieved where it is absent. Otherwise, it does not concern either the project of socialism or of liberalism. Strangely enough, what Europe, if it is European, if nationalism is of European origin, Europe presented a very strange scenario. Nationalism having been embraced very tightly by ideologies which are completely at the opposite end of liberalism and socialism. I am talking about fascism. To fascism, nationalism had a special import. And it definitely was one of the, standing support system of the programs of the fascist political social system. So far as pure communism as propounded by Marx is concerned, the Marxists in this category, not the fake Marxists, in this category, would not accept nationalism as such. They find nationalism to be a barrier to their, dream of universality of working class unity. And they also find nationalism has later been molded into a kind of a vehicle for the spread of developed capitalism. Anyway, we find that the controversy remains there and it has not been solved, and it continues to be so, swaying the public mind off and on and providing, fodder to, social media. What happened in India, the scholars allowed themselves to be divided. A group, quite vocal, supporting the nationalist group, and another which are, to use the term, non-nationalists. I don't say anti, but non-nationalists. And they are not going to come to any kind of reconciliation of their differences. Now, if we accept the position of the non-nationalist scholars that, there was no question of the origin of nationalism here in India earlier, and it is an imported concept. If that is so, it implies that it has got to be superimposed on the prevailing mindset of the people, the masses, which therefore renders the notion of nationalism totally artificial. If it has not grown out of the sentiments, the basic aspirations, and also the thought process of the people here, then certainly if it has been imported, it's a foreign goods, no problem. But it is not certainly the part and parcel of the life cycle of the people here. Instead of the way nationalism flourished in the West, particularly in Europe, India did not experience nationalism, manifesting itself as a big bang. In fact, there were very cautious, laborious process of building the sense of unity throughout the length and breadth of India, inhabited by different types of people with different types of cultures, preparing them for this basic sense of unity that after all we are Indians. And that is why a great scholar, Indologist, Professor A.L. Basam of the School of Oriental and African Studies in London University, is a celebrated scholar. That is why Professor A.L. Basam has used the wonder that was India. To all of them, India was a wonder. They sought to understand why and how people of so many types did coexist for such a long period of time without much dissension. It is only recently that we are finding skirmishes between the Karnatakis and the Tamils people or other groups of Indians. But you see, throughout history we do not find, the kind of skirmishes, the kind of, violent conflicts occurring between the different types of communities living in India. Instead, the experience, took them to a different course of understanding. I would not blame the Western scholars because there was also two types of scholars. One, very dedicated, sincere Indologists, and there was quite a long list of them. I don't want to give you all the names. But in fact, of course, I must remember the great contribution of Sir William Jones as the founder of the Asiatic Society in the year 1784. And there are other scholars like Professor Will Durant in America, who wrote something on what India can teach us, Max Muller, Winter Nees and others. That was a very serious research as to understanding India. And they are a group completely set apart from the non-believers in Indian either superiority, greatness, or etc., etc. But they could not offer a comprehensive and satisfactory explanation of the pre-germination state through his India past, pre-germination of nationalism. In that sense, again, I will have to give some credit to Karl Marx. Not because he was an exponent of the dialectical materialism or the materialist interpretation of history. No, not that. He admitted towards the end of his life that his model of the materialist interpretation of evolution of society does not apply. He wrote it, does not apply to the case of India. And having been a very serious scholar of political economy, Karl Marx wrote that India is a very striking system. They are following not the European mode of production, but the Asiatic mode of production. And what is the striking peculiarity of this mode? It is more collectivized than, people in Europe could conceive. Land, which is the prime, natural resource and also the resource of capital. Capital, after all, comes from natural resources in a transformed manner. Now, land being a very valuable asset, even today it is, the position of land presents a legal question. Who can be the natural proprietor of land? And the Indian system, through its Dayabhaga and other methods of land ownership, it is collectively owned. contrary to the usual belief that the king or the emperor was the owner of everything. No. He was only a custodian of the landed property, which actually belonged to the entire population. Karl Marx understood this. That means that I would take this as the foundation of the growth of some kind of solidarity between the different types of people who have been living in India for ages and ages. The other misconception about Indians is that they are more otherworldly. Absolutely not. Indian civilization is maintaining a balance between this world and also the other world, which is beyond our normal experience. But there is something beyond, and it can be perceived, it can be realized. But I'm not talking about spirituality. The point is that if a whole collectivity of people is convinced that, well, this life is a limited grace period for us, and we are supposed to use it to the maximum possible limit so that the entire potential that inheres in me is fully utilized. That's the message there, which connects every enlightened India. I do not refer to education. Enlightened in spirit, enlightened in understanding. Most Indians would therefore believe that here is one life and there is the other, much more larger life space where you can enter by virtue of your perseverance. I'm not going into that. Now, once you have that kind of mindset, and once that mindset will get percolated to different layers of society, well, doesn't it mean that the entire people, or even a conglomeration of peoples, is getting transformed qualitatively? Not only materially, but also morally and also psychologically. Now, I will now go into some of the avenues and mechanisms which society presented, and through which the Indians, both belonging to the higher classes and also the ordinary Indians, could be made qualified to think of each himself or herself as an essential part of this Indianness. The sense of Indianness was allowed to be developed through many different mechanisms. We therefore accept as our starting proposition that nationalism in India had its breeding ground much earlier than is generally believed. It was nourished through ages by material and intellectual contents generated by India's society, however loosely structured that society might have been. Again, I refer to another eminent Orientalist, Professor Dark H.A. Kolb, Professor of South Asian History, who had been here some time back as a very distinguished participant in an international seminar on the unity of Indian civilization. And it is his observation that India's civilization is unity of a sovereign civilization. Unity of a sovereign civilization, that is his finding. And this actually contradicts another supposition about India, which comes from an American political scientist. His name is Benedict Anderson. And he has impressed many of our social scientists here. And I would not name him, but he happened to be my student at the Presidency College way back in the 1960s. He is very well known now. He borrowed this expression, imagine community. Well, you can imagine many things, but can you imagine a community which is a solid entity of living human beings? You don't have to imagine, you have to see, you have to feel, you have to observe. But instead of doing that, imagine community. Because you see, the proposition deliberately put forward by the American scholar is this: well, after all, they were not really eligible to, not prepared, not eligible for any kind of, well, nationalistic aggregation, which is I would say, an unconcealed falsehood. Very sorry to say that. But our scholars have been so impressed that they have borrowed this idea. No, neither Indian society, not even African society. They are backward, we know, but they are not imagined communities. They are very, very live communities, struggling with the problems of life and also discovering new ways of progress. So, let me now give you some instances of early India's efforts to bind together otherwise separately structured societies, many societies of India. For instance, if we talk about political structure, well, it's true that we didn't have a unified all India administrative system, but there were, serious efforts to do that. The Mauryas, the Guptas, the Sungas, and so many imperial systems in India. Even coming to the Middle Ages of the Islamic rule, well, we cannot exclude the efforts of Emperor Akbar. He had his own approach to, bring together the many different communities, including the incoming Islamic elements and also the Hindu elements. So efforts were there, but certainly this cannot be compared to the kind of tightly built, monolithic Indian political system that emerged during the British rule. We certainly admit that. But is that necessary at all for the purpose of the development of the spirit of nationalism, for the purpose of, feeling that I am an Indian? Not necessarily at all. That apart, what did society provide? What opportunities were there? I'm just, cutting short the text here. First of all, in the context of educating the minds of the people. And we know that we had a very ingenious system of teaching. And outstanding merit would come out of that process of teaching. It's called the Gurukul system of education. Now, in that system, the emphasis was on the concept of moral community, on the one hand, and also on the concept of successful mundane existence. You have to achieve success in whatever sphere you are now. And on top of that, they would be initiated to certain philosophical concepts. Not that they would all become philosophers, but you see, these basic philosophies must be imparted to any kind of educated person if he can claim that, after all, I understand something about the reality. Let me find out where is it. I'm skipping it. I would rather mention that, Indians were all the time interested in humanism to start with. Then the higher concept of karma. A further higher concept of the unified system of the working of the universe encapsulated in the concept of the Brahman. Now all these, very abstract concepts, not very easily comprehensible to the ordinary mind, but the system of the teaching was such that whoever went to the Gurukul system had some inkling of these highly philosophical concepts. Then, what were the agencies of the communicative, methods through which many different people would come together from different types of background and eventually absorb the basic spirit of Indianness? The easy answer is this: pilgrimage. Well, it is in the habit of the Indians that they must, visit some definite destination, a holy destination most of the time. And what do they do? Well, they certainly have the great satisfaction of having the darshan of the deity there. But apart from that, they have to communicate about their needs and problems with the local people, procure food, and also try to follow the kind of mantras, the prescribed methods of worshipping a particular deity. If you go to Kamakhya, if you go to Kedarnath, if you go to Meenakshi temple, well, you have different types of worshipping the deity. So, wherever you come from, for the purpose of your pilgrimage, you get accustomed to, you are familiarized with these different systems of, worshipping the deity. That, creates a kind of, fusion of minds. And not only that, even while remaining in a particular holy spot, well, a Tamil pilgrim, an Assamese pilgrim, a Kashmiri pilgrim, a Gujarati pilgrim, not that they would not talk to each other, they would. But there is no common language. Somehow or other, they had to manage to communicate between each other and try to exchange their experience. And apart from that, when they go back home, they carry the very valuable experience of having met so many different types of people, but owing allegiance to that particular deity or not. You may ask, you may object, well, this is all about, pilgrimage. Okay, leave aside pilgrimage. Why don't you replace the word pilgrim or pilgrimage by tourism? Tourism is a general interest. So when people come out and travel hundreds and thousands of miles, even on very difficult terrain, well, they enjoy the tourist spots. That also, instills in them the total idea of what India looks like. And in this, coming at this point, I suddenly am reminded of what Sister Nivedita told some of the devotees who used to assemble in the Vivekananda Society Hall on the Vivekananda Road. This was started by Sister Nivedita herself. So one evening she entered the place and found that the devotees were talking about all sorts of abstract philosophical and spiritual things, Brahman, etc. Sister Nivedita said, do you understand, do you know what your Matribhumi is? There is no immediate answer. Somebody said, well, I can cartographically perceive it on the map. Okay, bring a map. The map was hung on the wall and say, what do you see there? They would say that there is different types of provinces, different topographies, different vegetation, etc., etc. No. That is, the live picture of your Desha Matrika. Look at the Himalayas. This is the cerebral part of India, where the Indians have for ages been cultivating their cerebral faculties at different levels. Then those rivers, the holy rivers, and there is a mantra these days nobody ever he hears of that mantra. My father, every morning when he used to take his bath, he used to chant this. Gange cha Jamune chaiva Godavari Saraswati Narmade Sindhu Kaveri Jalesmin Sannidhinkuru. It was just a bucket full of water, and the conviction was that he is inviting the presence of all those holy waters in that same. So one doesn't make any distinction between an ordinary bucket of water and, the water of those, pure, rivers. Fine. There are many instances. And you may say that whatever the ordinary villagers, rural people, they don't have opportunities of, pilgrimage here and there, tourism, or even Gurukul training. So they are the millions, teeming millions. What happens to them? My simple answer is that, everything was arranged for them. The rural katha, the rural system of communicating the variations of Upanishad and Gita even, apart from Puranas, to, ordinary village people, through many different, ways, the theatre or the yatra, whatever it is. And then there were the melas. All the institutions were active throughout the year. Baro Mase Taro Parban. That means, the people were kept engaged in all the time, in a kind of thinking atmosphere that, after all, I cannot get out of this Indianness. And there is no question of religious distinction here. You can participate in any of these processes, whether you are a Hindu or not, doesn't matter. Okay? So I should now come to the final point. If this was the process which was being practiced for so many years, in fact up to the 10th century AD or Christian era, as you choose, up to that period, India had been through, enormous progress materially, and at the same time intellectually and spiritually. Unfortunately, a long break happened historically because of the invasion, settlement and occupation and permanent political rule or imperial rule by the incoming alien people. We generally classify history as a Hindu period. It's not true. It's a medieval period. It's medieval period. But because of the misfortune that India could not resist the invasion of these people coming, I am really surprised by the fact that, one Sultan Mahmud or one Ghuri would have the temerity, Shahos, temerity of, attacking the same temple 17 times, and there was no resistance. Who could defend the god? So that is why the misfortune fell on us. Then something happened as a matter of miracle. We did not invite the colonialists. They were searching for, where is India, where is India? Eventually they came here. And they took up the charge of the country, eventually producing a stream of two contradictory waves. One is allowing the local population to collaborate with them in consolidating their administration. They did not interfere with our family legal system. They did not want to interfere with our religious beliefs, etc. They only wanted that, we will just overrule yourself. And some very intelligent intellectuals of certain areas, particularly Bengal in those days, in the 19th century, they wanted to assess the actual motive of these colonialists. And they did find some very, motamoti, in a general way, I would say, motamoti means in a general way, not in a particular sense, interested governors and governors general, which allowed them to, achieve certain social reforms with the aid of the state. But that far and no further. Eventually it happened that, these educated, Western educated elites of certain areas of India, well, they were not prepared to accept the foreign rule anymore. And I'm not going into the details of what happened of these, nearly 150, 70 years of nationalist movement. I will stop here because you see what we lost during those 700 years of Islamic rule. Islam definitely contributed a lot to Indian civilization in the field of, well, culture, especially fusion music and architecture, administrative system, relating the revenue system with the agricultural product cycle, fine, no problem. And not all of them were really rabid communalists. What really made us pay dearly for this rule is that we have lost entire track of scientific investigation and scientific frame of mind which was developed very fast during the Maurya and then more so during the period of the Guptas. And Maharaj, I think we can recall that a great Indian scientist, a Nobel laureate, Professor J.V. Narlikar, was here. And there was a very serious discussion of the certain evolution in human behavior, etc. Professor Narlikar claimed that we should be prepared to accept one thing, that industrial revolution which came to England, first of all, in the Western Hemisphere, sometime between 17th and 18th century. But no, in India it could have been achieved, it could have been accomplished well before the 10th century AD. The way the progress was being made. On the one hand, there was plenty of wealth coming as inputs, investments for this kind of scientific projects, and there was, complete support from the ruling side. And you see the kind of royal court glittering with so many geniuses. That only indicated that brain power was developed, material power was developed, there was complete, support of the state for the purpose of development of scientific, achievements. If that was allowed to carry on, we would not mind. In fact, the majority of Indians, if they are Hindus, they did not mind the coming of the Islamic forces, Islamic rulers ruling them. They accepted for 700. There is no rebellion during all these 700 years. But if the Islamic rulers paid attention to this aspect of life, and so in those days, Indian treasury, if you call it a treasury in that time, it was overflowing with gold because of flourishing trade mainly from this southern part of Bengal to the eastern part of Asia and the western part of India, from Gujarat and other places to the western part of Europe up through the Middle East area up to Europe. But that period was lost. Narlikar therefore lamented that we missed the bus when it came. If we have missed it, but we gained in a different way because of the advent of the British colonialists. They opened our eyes to the value of our heritage in the first place. It was they who told us that, you have so many beautiful tourist spots. I don't have to name, India is littered with so many tourist spots of historical importance. And they converted the old, antiquated system of transport by, introducing the railways, the steam engine and all that. As a result, what was lacking in the earlier period of putting social content into nationalism was partly filled up. This is the positive side of imperialism or colonialism, but there are, the darker sides. We stand here today in the 77th year of independence. I do not know whether the present generation of Indians have ever been taught to develop some legitimate interest in understanding what India was and what India is. That is, the snag we have to face. If we are already a nation, no doubt about that. We achieved it through, years and years of struggle. We have been recognized by almost all the civilized nations of the world, and today we are being pushed to the third great power of the world. That's no mean achievement. In the last 10, 20 years' time, this has happened. Let us at least stand up to the challenge that is before us. And 3 cautions were exercised by our leading lights in those times when the national independence movement was taking place. Swami Vivekananda. About the great loopholes of the Indian society, Hey Bharat Bhuliyo Na, just remember, the clarion call he made. This type, divisiveness, this is not going with a developed society. This has got to stop. There was Bankim Chandra making us conscious about the motherly, nature of the Swadesh, Swadesha Matrika. There was Rabindranath Tagore warning us that, don't mix up your nationalism with the Western type of nationalism that is aggressive, that is more equated with the power of the state, and it denies legitimate opportunities to the places where they go. No. Ours is a very higher ideal. Your nationalism should be, as also Sri Aurobindo told us, should be a stepping stone to a higher consciousness of that we are all human beings living in this world as one single entity. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you, Professor Chakrabarti, for your high note of hope that you just mentioned in your last words. We are very thankful to Mr. Surendra, Mr. Karan Pal for still sponsoring and actively participating the Surendra Paul lecture, so instituted way back in 1991. You know that he was born on December 28, 1935 in Jalandhar, Punjab. Then he moved to, after completing his senior Cambridge from Vincent High School in Missouri, he moved to MIT in the USA to acquire knowledge and training in engineering technology management. In 1958, after completing his studies in MIT, he joined the APJ Group's family business, and by 1982, he took over the chairman of the group. His son, Karan Singh, is now the chairman of Surendra Paul Group, and I thank him, and I thank also Mr. Anirban Dotto for giving the welcome address of welcome, and I thank also some of the officers of the APJ Group who have joined this evening with us. A handful of listeners have come out of their own goodwill and urgency, of course. This is a very burning issue, how to maintain nationalistic spirit in Indians, among the Indians, present Indians, because we saw divisive forces acting upon us in so many various ways. National national spirit will have to mitigate all the challenges of differences. We have now differences in value system, religious faiths, ethnic characters, secular beliefs, even political and economic isms. Professor Chakrabarti has beautifully referred to all this, and he named some of the Indophiles, like L. Bassam, Mr. Bassam, Jones. Then even he pointed out Karl Marx's view on Indian system of solidarity, in having a collectivization system already rooted in Indian agriculture, this and that. So I am wonderstruck. And at the end, he gives some suggestions which are all worth noting. And our present generation needs to know we have so many communities living together peacefully. Now, the species is going to be challenged. That is the issue which is giving us more trouble, and we are very much concerned about that. If you identify yourself with any single community, you will be branded as communal. And if you are a communal, you are bound to become anti-national. You are bound to become anti-national. A communal person, maybe he or she cannot be nationalistic in spirit. So we have to be very much, watchful on that. We have to teach our present generation, young people, young persons. It is a very, very, burning question that I said. Very, very important question. We have to stay together by all means. And our motto has been always, Vividair Majhi Milon, unity in diversity. That has been our avowed principle. Avibhaktang vibhakteshu. There are so many divisions, but in the midst of this division, there is this undivided whole. This particular idea rang in his mind, Professor Chakrabarti's mind, and he ended with that hope. And we have noted his suggestions also, very apt, very timely. I am very thankful to him. He is always a teacher. He was a very, very effective teacher. In the Presidency College, popular teacher. I could have been his teacher. I could have been his student if I could have read over there. But I respect him as my teacher. This evening, he has stolen our hearts. He spoke extemporally. Extempore he spoke. But how beautifully he arranged his thoughts. And that's why it became so enjoyable to us. We have so many known faces, very, very, very much known as intellectuals, but good intellectuals, not one-sided, not having any iota of communal spirit in them. I just request all of them to propagate, to discuss among their friends, among their colleagues and students, a little bit of it. Hey Bharat Bhuliona, he remembered Swamiji, Rabindranath, and Sri Aurobindo too. Ultimately we are all one. We are different only in the waking state. But these differences attenuated gradually when we go to, when we pass through the dream state and ultimately vanish. These differences ultimately vanishes when we are deep sleep, when we are in deep sleep. That is our real nature, real state. Only in the waking state, on the surface, we are all different. But when we sleep, in sleep we are all one with our own consciousness, real nature. That is our state of existence, very much. That we are all Shiva, Shaurupa. That is not an imagination, that is not an intellectual conviction. That is truism. That's why Sri Ramakrishna said, Shiva Jnane Jiva Seva Karo. Shiva Jnane Jiva Seva Karo. It was not an imagination. He used to see in the depth of in our hearts that unity, even in the waking state. That is the message. We love Islam, we love Christianity. He was speaking about making pilgrimages. Those things, he told, those things apart, it is also a common phenomenon for all of us. When we visit some places of pilgrimage, we visit all the important places belonging to other faiths also. So Hindus are mild, but they are receptive in nature. That has been the blessing. We all tolerate. There is no limit to toleration. And mild Hindu is very, very strong. Mild Hindu is very, very strong. We have to uphold that. Because we lived this spirit. That is the message. That is the message. It is a Christmas message. One of the Christmas messages, I should say, we have to maintain this nationality spirit and avoid to become communal. Please remember, if you are communal, you have to be branded as anti-national. Thank you all. Thank you.